Good morning. I think we can start this webinar. It is awesome to have all of you here. We're going to have a webinar on China today, and you've all decided to come here. You've come with a lot of numbers, which is awesome, I believe. China is a great topic, so I'm excited to have you here. Yeah, China. We'll be hosting webinars every month. This month is about China. Next month will be, for example, on GPT-3. We'll be having an update on a new AI algorithm. And at the end of March, we'll be having a webinar on biotech. More on that later. But today is China. And China is such an interesting topic because more and more China is becoming an innovation powerhouse. They're in a rush to become a leader in scientific research. In 2018, China overtook the US as the world's most prolific scientific researcher. They published about 305,000 research papers a year. And China has prioritized innovation as a national core strategy. There are expected to be about 2,000 to 3,000 AI enterprises in China. It's a vague number, but that's the expectation. And we as BIT, we see a great combination with AI and industry and healthcare and mobility, and we'll touch upon that later today. So the purpose of today, why are we hosting this webinar? Well, first we want to delve into Beijing's aim to become a world leader in technology and innovation. Secondly, we want to give insights in the latest developments. And third, we want to reveal the broader geopolitical implications of China's rapid technological advancements. What will be in it for you? Well, first, we want you to understand how China has, over time, become this innovation powerhouse. Then we also want you to understand the most influential topics that China is investing in. And we want you to find out the most important institutes and companies in China. We'll be starting with an introduction from myself. There'll be a small part you'll hear for both Maartje and Xiaoxue. Maartje is my BIT colleague. She'll tell you about some technology developments. And Xiaoxue works for the Clingendael Institute. And she'll be talking about what we call Made in China, China's quest to dominate the high-tech industry. And afterwards, we'll be having a Q&A. It looks like this. It's 60 minutes. We'll be having 45 minutes of talks, 15 minutes Q&A. The chat is moderated for questions, so please use the chat for questions. At the end, we'll be making sure that we'll touch upon them. There will be no breaks. At the end of the day, you'll be having an email with an ebook, and we'll be asking you for feedback. How do you think that this webinar went? Tomorrow, the recording will be done. And we'll send it to you so that you can share it with all your friends and family and colleagues if you found this interesting. A couple of things on COVID. The gear is disinfected. Everybody here, Maartje and Xiaoxue, have their own microphones. We washed our hands. We want to keep distance. You'll see during the Q&A that we actually made places here so that we can keep our distance. So yeah, we'll try to do it as good as we can. And then one thing about China and why we are taking it seriously. Well, first of all, we know China can be controversial. With everything happening with their use of data and the social credit system, we know it can be controversial. But the way government is set up enables for a long-term vision and an investment strategy. And even though that it sometimes can come with bad things, like artificially intelligent systems doing things that we don't want computers to do, in parts, it also comes with opportunity. And therefore, we choose to keep looking forward and keep looking at what China is doing and how the technological advancements will influence our world 5 years from now. A little bit on BIT. BIT is a research and prototyping studio. We started about 4.5 years ago. We're now based in Amsterdam and Delft. We're with about 50 colleagues. We have a research team that tries to find the most important developments on tech, and we do that for our clients. And we have a prototyping team with which we try to validate hypotheses regarding these new technologies by building prototypes. And in this way, we aim to fast forward innovation, since we believe that our lives and our business and our planet have a world to gain from wisely implemented new technologies. Every technology we score on a maturity wave. And why do we do that? I'll dive into that maturity wave later, because we believe that as companies, we should skate where the puck is going. We borrowed that quote from a great ice hockey player. His name is Wayne Gretzky. His dad was his ice hockey teacher when he was a little kid, and he taught him, Wayne, all your teammates are skating after the puck, and you have to learn to see where the puck is going. So if we find technologies, we score it on what we call a maturity wave. It has 5 steps. At the end, there's science fiction. So things that we see happening or we can imagine happening, but we haven't really seen it in the real life. Then lab prototypes are things that we know of that is being tested in the laboratories. First applications, then we see it into the real world for the first time. Potential unlocked for us is when we actually see it in the real world and it has value. And mainstream is when it's mainstream adopted. Maartje later on will also refer to these 5 kinds of steps and the maturity wave. So simply put, about 2% of all companies are both good in exploration and exploitation. We as Bit, we feel ourselves as being an exploration company. So we try to look at new technologies and then prototype whether they have value. And then together with clients, we'll look at how can we explore or commercialize or implement these new technologies into their business. For every technology, we score it on whether it's feasible. So how is the technology feasible already? Viability, does it have a business case? And desirability. And without further ado, here is Maartje. Maartje is a colleague of mine. She's awesome. She studied at the TU Delft, and she's here to tell you all about China. Maartje, come on up.
Thank you, Marco. Yeah, let's get into it. All right. I am very excited that today I can finally show you all the technologies that I've been diving into over the past few weeks. It's been quite a ride, and I'm excited to show you all about it. So if there is one thing that I want you to remember from today, it is this. That slowly but steadily, China is becoming an innovation powerhouse. And I will prove this to you by going over a few industries. We'll talk about mobility, healthcare, connectivity, and space. And for each of these industries, I will paint you a future vision that consists of trends and tech. And I will end every industry explaining why you should care. Why is this an important industry to keep an eye on for you? So let's start with mobility. And regarding mobility, we see one big trend in China, and that is that China is leading autonomous mobility, starting with autonomous cars. China has big plans for autonomous cars, and by 2025, they want to have 1/3 of all their cars be conditionally driverless. And conditionally driverless means that the car can drive by itself and there's a human in there who can interfere in case of an emergency. Now, the big players that you should watch here are Pony AI, AutoX, and WeRide. And what is really interesting about these 3 companies has to do with the pandemic. Here you see empty roads in a big city in China. And what happened with these 3 autonomous car companies is that during the pandemic, they used these empty roads to accelerate their testing. So they started to test more and more with their cars. Meanwhile, in the United States, the autonomous car companies started to slow down their testing because of the pandemic. So what happened is that these Chinese autonomous car companies have gotten an advantage over the ones in the United States, which is a big competitor. So this is really interesting to see. Now, another thing that influences China's autonomous car development has to do with the driver's licenses. So I remember when I first got my driver's license, I was so happy that I had all this freedom, that I could go wherever I wanted. But this is very different in China, because in China, only 28% of the people have a driver's license, compared to 65% of Dutch people. So a much smaller amount of people has that freedom to drive wherever they want to go. This is why in China there is a much bigger need for these autonomous cars. That is also one of the reasons why Toyota has invested $400 million into the startup that I just mentioned, Pony AI. So we see a lot of development in autonomous cars, and we also see a lot of development in 5G. Now, the combination of these two creates a very interesting technology called CV2X, and that stands for Cellular Vehicle to Everything. This is a technology that connects all Internet of Things devices and more. So in this picture, for example, this autonomous car is connected to the cell phone from the cyclist, to the smartwatch from the lady crossing the street, to the traffic lights, and even to the street cameras. So this way, the CV2X technology is creating a map around the autonomous car that shows exactly where all the objects around it are. Now, this technology is allowing for something called pedestrian warning. So imagine that I'm crossing the street right around a corner, and there's an autonomous car coming around the corner, and it doesn't see me. In a normal situation, it would probably hit me because I am crossing the street at a very dangerous point. Now, with this pedestrian warning, which is created using this CV2X technology, the autonomous car already connects to my smartphone in my pocket as I'm crossing the street. And that way it already sees me before I am in the line of sight of the car. So this way I don't get hit and everything is good. So this creates a lot of road safety in China. Now, to give you an idea of when this is going to happen, this is right now in the first applicant stage. So in about 5 years, we expect this to be mainstream and used all around China. Now, onto something a little bit more mainstream that we all know, and you might even own one. I'm talking about electric vehicles. This is one of my favorite topics because it ties in with so many other topics that I'm going to talk about today. And one of the reasons why I find this interesting is that in before 2019, China was behind on other big electric vehicle users, such as the United States. But since 2019, China is the biggest electric vehicle user in the world. In China, there are 1.8 million electric vehicles compared to 0.4 million electric vehicles in the Netherlands. So China is the biggest user. Now, if you look at the amount of inhabitants in a country, Norway wins. But when you just look at the number, China is the biggest one. Now, they're not just the biggest user, they're also the biggest producer. And in order to produce electric vehicles, you need to produce batteries. Now, batteries have 3 main components, and one of those components is lithium. China is the 3rd biggest lithium producer in the world. They are leading this production. Now, the second material that you need for batteries is cobalt. Over 70% of the cobalt in the world that's produced is produced in Congo. And these mines in Congo are controlled by China. So let's take a step back. China is using the most electric vehicles in the world. China is producing the most electric vehicles in the world. And the batteries materials, lithium and cobalt, are dominated by China. Now, I said there was a 3rd material that you need, and that is spherical graphite. And China controls almost 100% of the spherical graphite production. So, in this industry of electric vehicles, there is one country who has the most use, the most sales, and the most production, who controls the lithium, cobalt, and spherical graphite production in the world. So this is a very powerful position to be in. Now, we do see something happening which will change the dynamic, and that is that Tesla is trying to make batteries that don't use cobalt. So this will make batteries less dependent on China's resources, but nevertheless, have in mind the powerful position that China has for electric vehicles. All right, so why should you care about the mobility sector? There's 2 reasons why you should care. The first one is that batteries are the new oil. Batteries, we need it for everything. We need it for electric vehicles, and China is controlling the materials we need to make batteries. So expect batteries to be very expensive, or at least dominated by China. The second thing why you should care is that autonomous technologies are ready. They are ready. They are being used in China. They are being used in Europe. So the question is, are you ready to use it in your business or in your everyday life? Okay, that was the section of mobility. Now let's get into healthcare, something completely different. For healthcare, we see that China is optimizing it. And it's optimizing healthcare, first of all, by using artificial intelligence. Here you can see a booth on the side of the road in Shanghai. And here you can go inside, you can input your medical details, you can input your symptoms, and the machine will use artificial intelligence to diagnose you. It will also tell you which medicine you need, and you can buy it in the vending machine next to it. And this way, they are optimizing their healthcare. They're not just doing it with these booths. They're also doing it on a much more sci-fi-ish scales. iCarbonX is a startup in China who is creating smart mirrors. And these smart mirrors, they will diagnose you as you stand in front of it, maybe while you're brushing your teeth or you're combing your hair, and it will tell you exactly if you're healthy or if you have some sort of a problem. Now, this is using artificial intelligence for diagnosis has shown by research in Houston that for certain types of cancer, it is 30 times faster to diagnose them. And for certain types of cancer, it has a 99% accuracy of diagnosing them. So this is promising technology. That also shows in the money that is involved in this industry. So the medical AI industry is expected to reach $51 billion by 2027. And to give you more of an idea of this number, that is 1/5 of the global AI industry market value. So this is a big chunk of the global AI market. So when will we be able to use this AI technology for healthcare? Now, we expect that to be within 5 to 10 years, as we see a lot of movement happening in China. China is not just optimizing using AI. It's also optimizing through internet hospitals. These internet hospitals allow you to have online consultations with a doctor. And you might think that this is a pandemic thing, but it's actually not, because since 2014, these internet hospitals have started to occur in China. However, the pandemic did give it a big boost, because the company WeDoctor, this is a company from Tencent, one of the big tech giants in China, and WeDoctor has seen a 3.6 increase in online consultations in the past year. So the pandemic did give this a big boost. Now, what is really beautiful about these internet hospitals is that they allow remote areas, people who live in these remote areas, to have more accessible healthcare. So we expect this to be adopted in other countries who have people living in remote areas as well. Now I want to get into something a little bit more controversial. I don't know if there are any Marvel fans out here. Raise your hand if you're a big Marvel fan. When I Googled gene editing movies, I found Spider-Man, and China is moving along the gene editing line. So gene editing, if you're not a Marvel fan, means that you edit, change, or remove or add gene parts to someone's genome from an individual or an animal. And this man did a very interesting experiment. He got 3 years jail time for what he did. And I'll tell you what he did. He edited the genes of 2 embryos to make them HIV resistant. Now, he got these 3-year jail time for that, but that did not stop China from moving forward with developing gene editing technologies. And we see that in, for example, Edigene, which is a startup which is on the top 10 of medical startups in China. And this startup has raised $118 million worth of funding. It's not just startups, though. The Chinese government, according to a US official who stated this in January, is working on bio-enhanced soldiers to give their soldiers biologically enhanced capabilities using gene editing. Now, this is quite far away, but we see that it's already being used. So when will this be mainstream for us? We expect that to be within 10 years as we see all this movement happening in the research area. So why should you care about healthcare in China? You should care because the waiting room is being replaced by online consultation. Because of the pandemic, it has internet hospitals and these AI booths that I was talking about have really increased in use. And it's expected to move to other countries as well, where they need this accessibility to healthcare. The second reason why you should care is that healthcare is moving to a micro level, and it's preventing diseases that were once incurable. You can make people HIV resistant, and even though it might be a bit controversial, we do see that research is working on this, so expect things to happen here. Okay, on to our third industry, which is connectivity. And for connectivity, I want you to have a look at this old drawing. Some of you might know what this is. This is the old Chinese Silk Road. And why I want to show you this very old picture in a talk about very futuristic technologies is because China is actually building a digital Silk Road. This digital Silk Road, the plan for it was raised in 2015, and the goal is to make other countries more developed on certain levels, such as telecommunication networks, cloud computing, surveillance technology, smart cities, and lots of other high-tech areas. The countries that are involved in this project are located all around the world. So they reach from South America to Egypt to Europe, and they are all improving their telecommunication networks. What we see that China is actually also doing here is that it is creating a demand for its own services. Huawei is expanding its 5G network all around the world, and in Nigeria, people can watch Chinese TV. What is also happening is that in these countries, the Chinese move there to work on these telecommunication networks. And what is happening is that racism and inequality is occurring in these places. What is also happening is, of course, on the one hand, that these countries are being more developed regarding their telecommunication networks. They're also getting more and more reliant on China and are getting in debt with China. So you could say that there is a good side and a flip side to the coin here. Now onto something a little bit more into the future, and that is 6G. Last November, the first 6G satellite was launched. While in the Netherlands, we are still rolling out the 5G network, China already has a broad 5G network and is now moving to 6G. And 6G will have a lot faster speeds. But before we get into all the 6G stuff, I want to take a step back to 5G. Who has a tattoo here? All right. You know how your tattoo was made, probably, most likely just by somebody who put it on your arm. But using 5G, it's actually possible to have a tattoo artist on the other side of the world, maybe in Australia, use a robot arm to put a tattoo on your arm while you're sitting here in, for me, Amsterdam. If this is already possible, then you can also, using 5G, do remote surgeries. So the best neurosurgeon of the United States might be able to do a surgery to someone in Berlin. Now, this is all already possible. So if this is possible, what can 6G do? Well, 6G can be transporting holographic images wirelessly. It has microsecond latencies, and it can increase and improve the advanced driver assistance systems for the autonomous cars that we already talked about. Now, what I am really excited about as a designer, I have a design background, is this statement from Ericsson, who said that 6G will allow the Internet of Senses. This is the younger sister of the Internet of Things, and it will allow technology to give smell and feeling and taste and warmth and coldness. And this can really increase and extend your consumer experience. So this is a very interesting development for me as a designer. This is expected to be here by 2035. That's when global 6G will be implemented. Now, why should you care about this connectivity development? First of all, because China is creating a sales market dependent on China. They are creating demand for themselves, and this makes them very independent and not reliant on other countries. The second reason is that 6G is opening doors for an elevated consumer experience in every industry. So no matter which industry you are in, most likely you have a consumer experience to give. And this 6G technology is going to open a lot of doors to elevate this experience. Now on to the last industry, and that is space. And space always feels a little bit sci-fi, so get on the tip of your seat, the front of your seat. This is going to be really cool. Because when it comes to space, China is using it. China is using space. I want to have a look at this picture. What do you see here? Maybe you say you see the Milky Way. That's right. Maybe you say you see a bunch of stars. But what China sees here are options. Because first of all, China is planning on going space mining. Like I said, on Earth we need cobalt for batteries, but the cobalt on Earth is going to run out pretty soon. Where we do still have a lot of cobalt and other important minerals is in space, in asteroids and planets. The European Commission stated that by 2030, we are going to run out of cobalt. So that is in less than 10 years. What I also told you already is that over 70% of the cobalt production in the world is controlled by China. So let me paint you the picture. China is controlling the cobalt production on Earth and is now trying to go to space to control our space resources of cobalt. They are using Origin Space, which is a startup, who now launched the Neo-1. That's a robot who's scouting for mining possibilities in space. Now, what is it that is so interesting in space? Well, we have a lot of these resources, and they actually are very valuable. So the value of minerals in near-Earth asteroids lies between $800 million and $8.8 billion. This is a wide range, so a lot of research needs to be done here, but this shows just how big the value is if we do get to the space mining stage. And if all goes well, we are expected to be there in 10 years. That's when the first space mining missions will be up. So get ready for that. China is not just using space for its minerals, it's also using space for energy harvesting. By 2035, China wants to have a solar space station up in space to collect solar energy. Right now, we only collect 1/23 billion part of the sunlight. So all the rest of the sunlight is wasted. We could still use it, but we are not able to capture it right now. If we could capture more of that, that would be a great solution for our rising energy demand and the decreasing fossil fuel availability. We see that $28 million has been invested by the Chinese government into this space solar station project. So, like NASA said, China has a very good chance of succeeding 5 years before the planned date. So that would be in 10 years from now. Lastly, why should you care about space development? First of all, because China is creating the ultimate battery material monopoly. Like I said, they are having a very strong position on battery materials on Earth, and they are now working on creating a monopoly on the materials in space. The second reason is that China is the biggest player in solar energy. If they do manage to get their space solar station up in the air, and we don't have any fossil fuels anymore, we need to get green energy somewhere, and China might be a very big supplier at that point. Now, it is very easy to say that all this space stuff is very sci-fi and it's not really relatable to us. But when you think about our need for batteries, for electric vehicles, and our need for these resources and energy, you can see that China is building a very strong position for itself today and in 10 years from now. That was the end of my presentation. We've talked about mobility, we've talked about healthcare, connectivity, and space. And to round it all off, if there's one thing that you take with you to talk about during your next Zoom meeting or during your next dinner with your wife or your children, let it be this, that slowly but steadily, China is becoming an innovation powerhouse. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Maartje. Gosh, how, oh, here we are. How awesome was that? The girl is only 22. Can you imagine? So I'm really delighted to introduce you to our next guest, Xiaoxue. Xiaoxue works for the Clingendael Institute. She is an in-house sinologist for Radio 1. Yeah, she's going to tell you about China. Welcome.
Thank you, Marco, and thank you for inviting me to join your webinar. After Maartje's talk on specific technological developments, now we'll zoom out to look at China's high-tech ambitions. What is behind all these developments? When we hear about all these developments, it's kind of hard to realize, but only a few decades ago, China was still a closed economy that was focused on low-level manufacturing. The Chinese economy only opened up in 1978, at which the Chinese government had a plan to develop the economy slowly but surely, while still maintaining a hold over the economy. So right now, China is a socialist market economy, which means that in many ways it is free. In many ways, the Chinese government, the Communist Party, is guiding the economy and has control over it. And it does this through 5-year plans. So through 5-year plans, it has set out a goal to develop the economy. And the results we've already seen where we stand now from Maartje's presentation. And now let's look back a little bit. Here we see a graph from the World Bank of the GDP rise of China compared to the United States and the Netherlands. Now we see where it started in 2000 as a very low GDP compared to the size of the country. And over the years, it's risen immensely to become the second largest economy in the world. Here we have another illustrative graph. It's from the Global Innovation Index that's made up by the World Intellectual Property Organization in collaboration with universities, etc. And a few years ago only, in 2013, China was the 35th most innovative country. Now last year, 2020, China rose to rank as the 14th most innovative economy, still below the Netherlands, still below the United States, but with incredible growth. Here, another graph. We see the gross domestic spending on research and development from China, where we see China as the red line, clearly increasing these domestic spending in research and development to outspend Germany, Japan, South Korea, and reaching levels of the United States. And lastly, here we see the global share of patent applications by China, where we see that China is the red share. And by now, I think this is about 2018, 2017, China has a share of 40%. Excuse me, China has a share of 40% of all the global patent applications. Now, this sounds very impressive, but we need to take this with a word of caveat, in that this only looks at the quantity of patent applications and not at the quality of patent applications. Most of these patent applications are domestic and not international, and will likely not all hold up to international standards. But still, this illustrates the progress that China has made. So now let's look to the future. What is next? China aims now to become a technological superpower. China has moved from low-level manufacturing and is now facing the middle income trap. And to outgrow this trap, China needs to invest in moving up the global value chain, moving into emerging industries, moving into high tech. Now, the government aim is to become a global tech power by 2035, and this aim will be reached through industrial policy. Now, there are a bunch of different industrial policies that are relevant, but the biggest ones I will highlight, which are Made in China 2025 and China Standards 2035. And these are plans that are led by the central government, but they were made in collaboration with local governments, companies, research, etc. Now, let's first look at Made in China 2025. What is this plan all about? Now, as I said, China wants to move up the global manufacturing value chain. It wants to move into emerging industries, control these value chains. Now, China has chosen 10 core industries to focus on, to prioritize for this initiative. You can see them in this graph here from Merix, Chinese think tank, a German Chinese think tank. And you see that there are 10 priority areas that the Chinese government will focus on, that it will invest in, that it will focus its regulation on, that it will subsidize. Now, I will not mention all of these, but among them we can see new materials, new energy vehicles, aviation and space equipment, etc. So I'm sure that the viewers are also represented in some of these sectors. Now, for each of these sectors, China has chosen national champions to lead the way, which means that it's unfair competition because these companies get a lot of state-backed support, and also for other Chinese companies themselves will receive less support than these national champions. Now, also in this infographic, we see a sort of timeline. In 2025, China wants to become a major manufacturing power. In 2035, China aims to become a global manufacturing power. And by 2049, China aims to become a leading manufacturing power. Now, China has chosen this date because it's very special for the Communist Party. This is 100 years after the People's Republic of China was founded. So it's a very symbolic date as well. Now, what does this mean in practice? This means that for these sectors that we mentioned, there's a lot of state-backed financing, subsidies for companies to improve in these sectors. And for us, that means that China is investing more and more in strategic sectors, in strategic technology as well. These Chinese companies are being incentivized to take over foreign tech so that they can improve themselves. And we can see this here in two tables that I've taken from a Clingendael report that I wrote. First table one is the value of Chinese direct investments in the Netherlands per year from 2000 to 2019. So we can see that this has risen quite a bit. It's still at reasonable levels, but what really matters for these investments is where they land. And this is what we can see in table 2, where we see the major Chinese acquisitions in the Netherlands from 2000 to 2019. And we see that these largest acquisitions are in strategic industries. Most of them are invested in Philips companies from semiconductor industry. So China is moving into the semiconductor industry because this is an incredibly important technology. And we can see some big takeovers here. Now, if you look at who is taking over, a lot of these are state enterprises that can count on state-backed subsidies, state-backed loans, preferential regulations. So this is why these companies are able to move here and invest in the Netherlands. Now, another way that the Chinese government wants to move up the value chain is through economic espionage. And it's not exactly clear to what extent, specific data, specific numbers, but it's clear that China is indeed using a global cyber offensive program to try and take over foreign technology. Next to this, in collaboration with Dutch companies, foreign companies, Chinese companies are also trying to influence tech transfer. So in collaboration with foreign companies, these Chinese companies will try and take over tech as part of the agreement. On to the other initiative, China Standards 2035. And this moves beyond manufacturing and moves to setting the global standards for emerging technologies. So what does this mean? Well, this plan was started in 2018, started researching for it, and the exact plan isn't published yet. It was supposed to be published last year, and we're expecting it to be published sometime this year. And it's made again in collaboration with the private sector, companies, universities, research. So a lot of effort has gone into this plan, and it's aimed at setting the global standards. Now, why does this matter? Now, setting the standards gives you influence over the emerging technologies. Consider now that most of the standards that we use today are being set by the West. For example, we have the internet that's based on Wi-Fi. We have navigation that's based on GPS. So if you're able to set the standard, it means you have a long-term advantage in these sectors that is quite difficult to overturn. So setting the standards is very strategic in the long term. Now, China is trying to do this from a top-down and from a bottom-up approach. Bottom-up through, for example, if we take 5G as a case study, laying down the infrastructure by Huawei. If Huawei lays down the infrastructure, Huawei determines the standards upon which the infrastructure is built. If we look at top-down, China aims to influence global standards by joining global standards bodies and by improving standards at home. So once again, this is a step-by-step process where first Chinese government wants to improve standards at home, then make sure that foreign standards and global domestic standards are more aligned, and also move into global standard setting bodies. And here it has an advantage. These global standard setting bodies are where members can vote on global standards. And from China, there is a lot of Chinese companies that are joining, and they're all voting along a certain line. And this is also because if they would not vote according to this line, they would face economic consequences at home. Because although there is still a lot of freedom in the Chinese economy, the Chinese central government still sets the parameters within which these companies can operate. Now, what does this mean in the long term? Why should we care? What are the consequences of these ambitions? Well, for us, it would mean reduced competitiveness, because this is not a win-win situation. If China gains more control of global value chains, of standards, its own position will rise at the cost of our own position. So our competitiveness will decrease, and our companies will be less able to innovate. Geopolitically, China's economic rise will also mean a rise in global influence. We can already see it now. Maartje mentioned the digital Silk Road, for example, where China is using its economic power to increase its influence in other countries, to invest, which means that China will have more leverage over these countries. Now, this isn't all a done deal. There are still a few obstacles. These are plans and doesn't mean that they're realized yet. For example, obstacles are resistance from within China. That these plans are being pushed by the central government doesn't mean that all Chinese actors agree with them, will work with them. And because China is such a big country, the implementation process from the central government to local governments can be quite tricky. Another obstacle is how the rest of the world reacts. The Made in China 2025 initiative was set off quite a lot of alarm bells here in the West, as you can imagine, when seeing China state that it wants to take over global value chains. So in response to this huge backlash from other countries, China started toning down mentioning these initiatives and still pursuing these aims, but not mentioning them as much. And also, as we can see, for example, in the trade war, in increasing awareness in the Netherlands, in Europe, of the geopolitical consequences of engaging with China, there is still quite a lot of pushback. So whether these ambitions will be realized will also depend on how we ourselves react. And what does this mean for companies? It means that doing business with China or having global value chains that are connected to China isn't a natural or a neutral option anymore. Because you can see now, for example, with the trade war, economic sanctions are influencing whether companies can do business with or in China or the United States. So for companies themselves, this also means that they will need to keep track of geopolitical developments so that they can anticipate and that they can react appropriately. Now, that's it for now. Let's move into the questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Xiaoxue. Yeah, before we shuffle, a little bit of ending, and then we'll dive into the questions. Is that all right? Thanks. Cool. Let's see. Oh, yeah, we need to move now. Have you moved there? Lovely. Awesome. Thanks, Xiaoxue. That went really well. We're closing this part off. So we talked about China. I think a lot to have learned from this part. At the end of the day, all of you will be having an ebook that we made on China and the technological developments. So do look forward for that. As we said, we will be also asking for feedback on this webinar, as we believe that from feedback we can grow. I have a feeling that every webinar up until now, for the people who've been here from every webinar since last year, we've been growing quite a bit. Next up, like I said, if you can get enough, the next one will be about GPT-3, which is a AI algorithm made by OpenAI and recently bought by Microsoft. But there's quite some interesting updates on that. And March 25th, we'll be having a webinar on biotech. If you can get enough, at the end of the week, every week, we send out a newsletter. Go to newsletter.wearebit.com and you'll read lots of interesting articles on new developments. And with that being said, let's chat and let's dive into the Q&A. We need to shuffle now. So Maartje, if you want to sit over there, I'll get out of the way. And then Xiaoxue, if you want to stand in the middle here, so we can keep distance. And I hope now that in a way I can be here as well. Yeah. Let's see if we can get some questions. Can we get the questions on the screen? Good stuff. We have a couple of questions here. There's one question from Walter. Where does China's autonomous driving capability exceed the US, which was leading the last 5 years? Maartje, can you touch upon that?
So I can touch upon autonomous flying for you, Walter, because for the driving, I wouldn't be sure what to pinpoint, but for the flying, autonomous flying with drones, for example, China is advancing in the urban air mobility part. So that's flying around autonomously and transporting humans. And there they are excelling at traffic management. So what's really special about what China is doing in the air with autonomous transport is managing multiple autonomous vehicles flying at once. This is really difficult because you don't want them to, they need to see each other, they need to see other vehicles like airplanes. So this is what they're doing in the air department. Could be also on the streets.
Thanks, Maartje. And Xiaoxue, regulation-wise, do you think there's, like, when it comes to developments in, for example, autonomous technologies, do you think that regulations in China have an influence?
In what way do you mean?
Like, will their regulations make sure that they get ahead of, for example, Europe and America? And how do you see that happening?
That's indeed what the Chinese government is aimed at. That's what it's trying to achieve, to have this competitive edge in these industries. And regulations is one of the ways in which it's trying to do so.
Nice. What do you think, like, if it comes to China? I bet with your work and your study background that there's a lot of opinions on China. What do people usually get wrong?
I think one of the things that we need to keep in mind is when we talk about China, is we talk about central government, local government, businesses, universities, and these aren't all moving according to the same plan. Each one has their own interests. And just because the Chinese government is doing a few questionable things doesn't mean that all Chinese actors are bad.
Right. About these questionable things, like how do I have a feeling that we in the West have a certain opinion about that. How does that do? Like, can you say that there's a Chinese counter argument on it, or that they have a different feeling on how the world is looking at them? Is there a, so to say, way to look at that?
There's always this defensiveness from China when it's being criticized by foreign governments. And the first reaction is to say, well, first look at your own country. There is human rights violations in these aspects or those aspects. So this is the first way that China tries to deflect this criticism. And another way in which it tries to do this is by saying, well, these are our own internal affairs, and you have a Western biased view on these, so you don't really understand. So if we take Xinjiang, for example, the Chinese government claims that this is necessary to put a stop to terrorism, stop to extremism. But the methods, of course, it says itself are justified. But from our perspective, these are really way too harsh in comparison to the threat.
Right, right. All right. See if there's more. Maartje, you've been researching China quite a bit when it comes to technological. We haven't touched upon food and agri. Erik, I see your question here. Webinar will be coming up. We haven't announced it yet, but a webinar will be coming up on food and agri. Anyway, Maartje, have you seen developments there? I'm not sure if you have.
I have seen developments in the precision agriculture innovations. So you can think of autonomous drones flying over crops, spraying only the crops that look sick, for example. You can think of using very smart watering systems, and the precision that is maybe even more precise than we use in the Netherlands. So that is very interesting to dive into more for another webinar.
Yeah, for sure. And I saw one of your researchers that, so there's been this competition on strawberry growing between researchers and farmists or strawberry growers. And it was a 4-week competition. And at the end, the data scientists or the AI experts had about 100% more grown strawberries and bigger strawberries than the normal farmers with years of experience. So it's super interesting to see that as well and see these competitions happening there. Cool. Then, Maartje, how can our tech startup and research community in the Netherlands best cooperate with their counterparts in China while keeping control over their IP and integrity? Ooh, that's a hard question. Maybe for both of you. Any idea on how we can work together with Chinese startups and companies?
I think there's actually also research published on that recently, on working together with China in high-tech industries and working together with universities. Because these universities do operate according to their own interests, but they are operating within the parameters of the central government. So that means that engaging with a Chinese university is not the same as engaging with a German university
Right.
or another university in Europe.
Right.
So what this means is, first of all, that there needs to be more awareness of the risks. And I think that the Netherlands has been a little bit slow in increasing this awareness because China's only recently been seen as this big threat since the last couple of years. And before that, engagement with China was purely looked at from an economic perspective.
Right.
So to be aware of these risks is really important.
Good. Anything to add?
No, I think Xiaoxue is in power here with her knowledge.
All right, cool. There are some more questions. Let me see. Xiaoxue, where is the level playing field? Where still many innovations are funded by the Chinese government and products are dumped on the market, where Western countries start and scale-ups need to invest their money or need to attract investors in innovation funding. Where's the level playing field? Any idea?
This is exactly the problem for
Right.
Dutch companies, for Western companies, because there isn't a level playing field. Chinese companies and Chinese actors can move into Europe without restriction. The Netherlands especially benefits from this open global economy. But the other way around, it's not the same, because when foreign companies want to move into China, there's a lot of regulations, a lot of standards, a lot of other ways in which domestic companies in China are being having preferential treatment over foreign companies. So this level playing field is not there. And this is why we need governments to take action to change this.
Nice. Thanks. Oh man, there's so many questions. I think, what time is it? We have 4 minutes left. One more. Hassan, he asks, is the West still underestimating China from a technological perspective, or are we properly aware of their power? Maartje.
I think that's a really interesting question. What I noticed when I was researching was that many of the things that I found, at first, when I saw the title of an article, it seemed very far away or far-fetched, or, oh, that's just one of those things that you see in a random article come by. But then when you dive into it, you see that they actually have good arguments that they are going to succeed, and that other big institutes such as NASA, such as other governments, acknowledge that China is going to achieve what they are planning to achieve. So I think, for me personally, I definitely underestimated China's technological developments because they're doing it.
Right. That'll be it. I think we have there's so many questions still open, but it's almost 10. So I think it's good. It's a good time to wrap up. Everybody, thanks for being here. I really appreciate the time. You've been here with lots of people. Like I said, at the end of the day, you'll be having an ebook. If there's still questions, most of you know how to reach us. Respond on the email. I hope to see all of you in a later webinar. For now, Maartje, Xiaoxue, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Let's stop it all.